Hey, what's up, guys? Got another Star Wars Unlimited trading card game video for you today. I know there's probably not a whole lot of interest in this game from my dozen or so subscribers on this channel. It is, after all, a new Disney canon-based trading card game, but on the other hand, it is a new Star Wars trading card game. I have always been a big fan of Decipher's Star Wars CCG from 1995 to 2001, and getting a new Star Wars trading card game in 2024 from Fantasy Flight, even if it's new Disney canon, if the card pool's wide enough, you can kind of exclude sequel trilogy characters in that. And that's what I've tried to do in this deck profile. So we have Chancellor Palpatine, and he has a unique play mechanic that kind of reminds me of the old Star Wars Decipher CCG objectives, where they flip. So most leaders in Star Wars Unlimited, when you have enough resources in play, the leader can come onto the field and be deployed as a unit. And there are some leaders with 4 deploy, cost 5, 6, 7. It all depends. There's a whole bunch of leaders. But Chancellor Palpatine, in addition to having a ability action, at the end of the ability action, if you fulfill it, you can flip the card, and his aspect changes to dark side and changes to Darth Sidious here. So I kind of like this play mechanic. Very interesting. Plus, you have an engine sort of built in that helps you win the game. So it gives you a plan of attack and dealing with your opponent. You're constantly healing your base and doing damage to your enemy base. And really all you have to do is deploy a dark side card when you're on this side, or have a light side unit card on your side be defeated to flip this. So you start the game off as Chancellor Palpatine on this side, and you're going to be flipping. So you're probably not going to flip turn one. Sometimes you are, and for that reason, you have to be very careful of your sequencing and what your opponent can do on turn one. So you just have to keep that in mind. In some cases, you'll actually pass rather than take the initiative. It all depends on what you're playing against. So on this side, you're probably flipping turn 2, and you want to get a 2-cost light side unit in play on turn 1. It's very important, because on turn 2, if you're going to flip, if a friendly light side unit was defeated this phase, draw a card, heal 2 damage from your base, and then flip this leader. So you're drawing an extra card. That's a good bonus. Plus you're healing. And really all you have to do is lose your light side unit. So you can attack into one of your opponent's units. Your opponent can attack you. There's some other ways to sort of trick out of play and kill your own units using exploit and other tricks in this deck that I'll show you later on. But after we flip and go to the Darth Sidious side, all we have to do is deploy a dark side card. So once you do that, at any point during the turn, you get a clone trooper token. So one of these, which is a 2/2 light side card. It gets deployed to your side of the field. Perfect fodder for defeating that next turn. But you also deal 2 damage to your opponent's base and then flip. So you're constantly healing, you're constantly doing damage to your opponent, and creating clone trooper tokens and drawing cards. Perfect engine, built-in engine. This deck has been played by red. I've seen green versions of Palpatine, but I've used blue, and for the simple reason that blue has its own draw engine with Khalil here. I'll talk about that in a second. But blue is an aspect that has a lot of healing and tends to stick around a lot longer than some of the other aspects. And you kind of want the game to go on as long as possible here, because the more times you flip, the better value you're getting out of Palpatine here. So you want a long, grindy game that you can really get the most out of this leader. because you can only flip once per turn. So the more turns you flip, the more value you're going to get out of that. And you're able to heal, like with this card, like right off the bat, restore 1. So in your opening hand, you definitely want a 2 deploy cost light side unit if you can. There's 11 of those in this deck, and you have about a 95% chance of doing that between your opening hand or your mulligan to get at least one of those cards. But you definitely want Khalil if you can. He's an Ugnaught, I think, from one of the Mandalorian TV shows. 3 copies of him in here. He restores 1 on attack, and then the reason you're playing blue is on attack, you discard the top card of your deck. If it shares the aspect of your home base, meaning it's blue, you get to draw it. If not, discard it. So you want to draw extra cards with him. And this guy, your opponent can't let this guy just sit around and draw you cards like that. Most of the cards in this deck are blue. There's a couple yellow in here. But if there's a good substitute blue card for what you're trying to do, you definitely want to include that, because this guy draws you cards, and you're going to need that for some of the strategies I'll tell you about in a second. But he forces your opponent to deal with him. A lot of times when your opponent sees that you're playing Palpatine, he'll just not engage you, not destroy your units, and thinking that you won't be able to flip. There are some ways you can destroy your own units in addition to attacking, into your opponent, trading units. There are some exploit ways to do that. But Khalil, I mean, his ability is so good, your opponent's not going to just sit there and let you draw cards off it. So he kind of needs to deal with that. So 3 of him. If you can't get Khalil, there's a couple of good substitutes in here. Clan Ren Rescuer. He's a cheap 2 deploy cost light side unit when played. Give an experience token to any unit. Could be him, could be another card. That would make him a 2/3. Or you could give it to another card that you think might stick around longer. I usually don't like to add health to him. I'd prefer to stick him as a 2 health. That way, if he attacks into somebody, he just gets defeated, and you can fulfill your objective on the Chancellor Palpatine flip. So 3 of him. We have a yellow card in here, R2-D2. Even though he's yellow, he makes up for it in the fact that you may discard a card from your hand and then look at the top 3 cards and draw one of those. The other 2 go back to the bottom of your deck. But because he has that draw engine, that ability to cycle through your deck, he's a very valuable include here. I have 2 copies of him. He's a 2/4, so he sticks around long enough he can take a hit or 2, and he's just good value at a 2 deploy cost. And for that reason, he's in here at 2 copies. I have 1 copy of Village Protectors. It is a Sentinel, so your opponent's forced to tack into it rather than your base, unless they have a Saboteur. Comes in with a shield. It's a 3 deploy cost, so you can't do it turn 1. You got to wait till turn 2. But at a 2/2, Sentinel is a great ability to have here, and for that reason, I have 1 copy. Also have Yoda here. Now, Yoda's a 3 deploy cost, but he restores 2 on attack, so your opponent kind of needs to deal with him. Restore 2 can be big in this deck, and then when defeated, he draws a card. So great value at a 2/4. Can't beat it. 2 copies of Yoda here. I have Akira. This is kind of a flexible spot in this deck. You could have a 3rd Yoda, could have another Plo Koon. There's a lot of substitute cards you can put in for Kira here. Could be a Millennium Falcon, if you want to spend $20, $25 on one of those. Could be another copy of Grievous. I have 1 copy of Grievous here, but I tried to keep this deck with budget in mind. I've seen some early lists that had 3 copies of Luke Skywalker, 3 copies of Vigilance, and Super Laser Blast. All these $20, $30 cards, $40 cards. I tried not to include it include those types of cards in here. I have one copy of General Grievous that runs about $16, and then one copy of Evacuate that's like 10 or 12. But I have Kira in here because she kind of disrupts your opponent's strategy. When she hits the field, you look at your opponent's hand and you can make one of their cards deploy for an additional 3 costs. So they basically can't deploy at that turn. It disrupts their strategy, and that stays in effect as long as Kira's on the field. So your opponent kind of has to deal with it sooner or later, especially if it's a card that your opponent that is a critical part of your opponent's strategy. Maybe something that he has 3 copies of. She's a 3/5, so decent stats, but I could definitely see this being swapped out for another option. Plo Koon's great, even though he's yellow aspect. He has ambush and coordinate, so he comes into the field untapped with ambush all the time. So normally he's a 3/6, but with coordinate, meaning if you have raid 3, so at least 3 units on the field, including him, so him and 2 other units at the very least, he becomes a 6/6 for a 5 deploy cost, and that's just incredible value. You could try other cards like Kiadi Mundi, but I think Kiadi Mundi has a blue aspect, so it kind of works with your engine here. But Plo Koon gets so much value that I had to include him. I really like playing him in this deck. Here we have Lieutenant Childson. So on turn 3, this is your ideal deploy. If you're drawing cards with Khalil and you get at least 1 off of him, and you're deploying like 1 card per turn, there's a good chance you can have 3 blue cards in your hand by the time he hits the field. So on your 4 resource turn, he goes from a 2/2 to a 6/2 if you reveal 4 other blue cards from your hand. And that's fairly easy to do with all the blue cards in this deck. So that's just tremendous value. A 6/6 for a 4 cost, plus he has Sentinel. And he fulfills, the backside of this leader objective, putting a dark side card in play. So 3 copies of him, he really gets you ahead at that point in the game if you're able to deploy him turn 3. We also have Bazine Natal. Now, she is from the Delilah Dawson short story, one of the very first short stories in the new canon, I remember, but I don't think they did much with her since then in the new canon. Anyway, she's a card from the second set. She's a 1/3. And then when played, look at your opponent's hand. You may discard one of those cards. So some hand hate for your opponent. And then they draw a card to replace it. But if you can find something important that your opponent has and they lose it, that's good value. 2 of her there. Plus she's a cheap dark side unit to deploy, fulfilling your objective again. I have 1 copy of General Grievous. This could easily be a 3 count. He has tremendous value at a 3 deploy cost, 4/4. He does some stuff with lightsabers, but there's no lightsabers in this deck. He's in here just simply for the value. Better than a Boba Fett, really, because the Boba Fett, I think, is a yellow aspect. Similar stats. I think he's a 3/5. But having a 4/4 for 3 and the blue aspect, you just can't beat it. It's a $16 card. If you have 3 copies, I mean, you could certainly include it, but it's not essential. Just 1 copy for now. I have 2 copies of the Client. He does a couple of things. He comes in shielded, so he can stick around a turn. And then instead of attacking, you can use his action, which would tap him, but you choose a unit, and for this phase, it gains bounty. So if something else is going to be attacked and you're going to kill it with either a spell card or another unit on the field, maybe a light side unit that you're going to trade off, you can put a bounty on one of your opponent's cards. And then once that's killed this turn, you heal 5 damage from your base. So making the game longer. Usually with this deck, your opponent's going to get an early lead, but the more turns that pass by, you're slowly going to come back. So this deck plays from behind quite well and has a number of ways to heal, including Morgan Elspeth. Now, she's a 4 deploy cost dark side unit, but we have a restore 1. And then on attack, this is one of the ways to cheat out a light side card from your side of the field if your opponent's not going to be attacking into you. So if you're on your light side portion of your leader on Chancellor Palpatine, you can sacrifice on attack another light side unit, and if you do, draw a card. So you can sacrifice one of your units. It's a good way to get it off the field if your opponent's not contesting ground at all, say for example, and you want to continue your engine. This is a good way to do it. 2 copies of her. Some lists I saw have Luke Skywalker, but you don't really want high deploy light side units, particularly toward the end of the game. You're going to want to spend like your 7 resource turn on a dark side card. You're not going to want to split it between multiple units. So I have 2 copies of Count Dooku in here. This could be a Luke Skywalker, but I think having the dark side aspect, like I said, is more important. He's not great value at a 5/4, but he comes in shielded, and then he defeats, when he comes into play, he just defeats a unit with 4 or less remaining HP. So it can clear something on the enemy's opponent side of the field. 2 copies of Count Dooku. Some deck lists play Supreme Leader Snoke here. I think the Zillo Beast is a good substitute. Kind of does the same thing. It's just a high deploy cost, beat stick. Your opponent's never defeating this. During your regroup phase, heal 5 damage from this unit. So unless your opponent has a spell card, like this thing isn't leaving the field in any easy way. And then give each enemy ground unit -5 for this phase. I think Snoke gives them a -2/-2 or something like that. But the Zil Beast, I think, is a good substitute. He's not gonna play it every. You're not gonna use this card every game, but sometimes you'll need it late game to just close things out. 3 copies of Restored Arc 170. We're moving on to our ship aspect of this deck. This is one of those 2 deploy cost light side units at a 2/3 restore 1. Great card, easy to include, 3 copies. This Geonosian patrol fighter has exploit 2. So when played, particularly on your second turn, so you'll have 3 resources at that point. It's a 5 deploy cost, but if you exploit your 1 light side unit, which would fulfill your flip objective, you can also use it to pay the cost to deploy this. So exploiting 1, you could play this card for 3 cost. If you exploit 2, you can play it for 1 cost. That's the way it works. So it comes down as a 3/2. And then when played, you may return a non-leader unit that costs 3 or less to your opponent's hand. So it takes away something off your opponent's side of the field as well. 3 copies. I have 1 copy of Inferno 4. It allows you to manipulate your top deck a little bit. It could easily be a 3rd copy of Concord Dawn Interceptors, but I felt like having another dark side unit able to be played for cheap is good value there. And sometimes you're just missing a dark side card, or your dark side cards are too expensive to deploy. So you want some cheap units as well. And for that reason, I put Inferno 4 in there. I have 2 copies of Conquer Dawn Interceptors. It's a Sentinel. If your opponent goes to space and you need to put something in the way of them doing damage to your base, this is a great way to do it. It's only a 1/4, but it has Sentinel, and then when defending, it has +2/+0. So 2 copies there. It's a light side unit fulfills your objective on the Chancellor Palpatine side. Redemption. I have one copy here, but I could easily see 2 copies. This is a great late game unit, so much so that I kind of hold this card in my hand if I can, because when you play it, you can take 8 damage tokens from either your base or any of your units or any combination and put it on here. So it heals 8 from your base and then gives you a 6 attack cost, a 6 attack power sentinel that your opponent has to find some way to deal with. And if they don't, you're going to be dealing 6 damage to your enemy's base. So just good trading value here at the end of the game. Plus it removes 6 damage from your base, can extend the game a turn or two. It puts you so far ahead that this is just a nightmare for your opponent to deal with. I could definitely see 2 copies there. I have 1 copy of Malevolence. Some deck lists play the Star Destroyer Avenger, which has a blue aspect. I don't have that card. It's like a $20 card, I think, at this point. There are some other Star Destroyers. There's the Chimera, which is a yellow aspect, and then Devastator, which is a green aspect. I have both of those, but since we're playing blue, I just wanted a high deploy cost space unit in addition to having redemption. So Malevolence here, it's an exploit 4, so you could really deploy this for 1. I don't think of it. I can't think of a scenario that would ever happen, but you have further healing, restore 2, and then it buffs an enemy unit -4, -0 for this phase. 7 attack power, 7 defense. Good card. Sometimes you need it at the end to close things out. Top target, I have 2 copies here. This has further healing from your base, so it's the only 1 drop in your deck. Sometimes on an odd turn, you'll have 1 more resource that you can use. This is a good way or scenario to play that. Just deploy it to one of your opponent's units, and if it's non-unique, when that unit is destroyed, you heal 4. If it's unique, you heal 6. So just a good card that can give you some healing on your base. Perilous Position. This is a 3-cost unit from the Twilight of the Republic set. It's -2/-2, so it could very easily just kill an enemy unit. But the icing on the cake here is this extra ability when played, exhaust the attached unit. So it can exhaust something that's maybe a leader unit that's just deployed to the field. That's a good time to use it. Anything really, it's good value. So 3 copies. The rest are just spell removal cards. I have 1 copy of Fell the Dragon. On the sideboard, I think I could include like 3 copies. I could easily see 3 copies, depending upon what you're playing. Between Takedown, Power of the Dark Side, Rivals Fall, it kind of depends on what you're expecting to play on what mix of these spell removal cards or these removal cards you're going to want to use. This defeats a non-leader unit with 5 or more power. This defeats a unit with 5 or less remaining HP, so very similar for 4 costs. 2 copies of Takedown. Rivals Fall for 6 just defeats a unit. 2 copies of that. And then I have 2 other cards here. I think I'm actually missing one. Evacuate. So we have Spark of Rebellion here. Look at your opponent's hand and discard a card from it. Early on, this can really mess up your opponent and make them skip a turn where they can't deploy anything. That can be very valuable early game. It could be even more valuable if you have 3 copies, but right now I just have 1. Change of Heart just takes control of an enemy unit for a turn. You can attack into your opponent's base and sort of finish them out. That's a good scenario to use this in. But if you for some reason it doesn't die, it goes back to your opponent the next turn. And then we have one copy of Evacuate. A lot of people have Super Laser Blast, which is a blue aspect card for 8. This is a good substitute because it's only 6. The only difference is it returns each non-leader unit to the owner's hand. So it doesn't deal with leaders. I think Super Laser Blast does. And then instead of sending them to the discard pile, it just goes back to your opponent's hand. So they can play it the next turn, but it sort of clears the field of units if they have like a ton of battle droid tokens or anything annoying that you don't really want to deal with. You can hold this in your hand for when you actually need it. So one copy of that, and that's the deck right now. So Chancellor Palpatine has a great draw engine. You could try it out with some different aspects with either red or green, but I think blue, because of its healing ability, because of its draw engine, the ability to extend the game multiple turns and getting more and more value out of Sidious and Palpatine on the flip, it just works really well. So that's the first deck profile video. I'll be sharing more of these. Maybe I'll share some Star Wars Decipher deck list videos from the old CCG if anyone's interested. But we'll see what kind of reception I have on this. Like I said, I've done some pack openings earlier on the channel. There wasn't a lot of interest. And then I tried to do a live stream last week of a box opening of the 3rd set, but I had some sound issues. I was cutting in and out, and it wasn't the quality that I wanted. So I'll keep working on this, test things out. But for now, I'll see you later.